Hi, I want to thank everybody for coming to our second session with Andy and the rest of our team. Any questions or comments that you have, we will have the question box up in our Zoom. And any questions can also be emailed to jcwhite@email.arizona.edu. And thank you again for participating in our second session. And we hope to see you again next week. And I will let Andy take it from here.
Okay, good morning. This is a lesson that will be done again on our back, but I put a person sitting. Jenny's going to be sitting here so that in case you want to figure it out from sitting, if I could have you all lay down on your back for just a minute. The gravity here with Ron is pushing down through his spine, all along his spine. Gravity for Jenny is pushing from her head right down through her hips. That's a different experience. It's a really useful experience to do this in a chair. It's just a different experience. So I'm going to do a brief introduction, again, to Feldenkrais in case you're new. And today's topic that we selected from when we started this series is changing the way you move. So there's a notion of if you injure your knee or your ankle or your shoulder, you have someone work on your knee, your ankle, or your shoulder, and you strengthen around it. We're a very strength-based recovery system often in our culture. And that can have really good effects. It can really work well. Feldenkrais work suggests that if we change the way we move in our whole self, we will gain strength and flexibility and significantly less pain. So I chose this lesson today having to do with the pelvis because pretty much everything moves through our pelvis. It's right in the center of us. For those of you who are new, welcome. And all I ask you to do is go very, very slowly, extremely slowly. Another thing that's a little bit baked into our culture of movement work is if you do more, you gain more. If you go further, you get more results. And that is strangely not true in the connection of the brain and body. So we're using movement to train the brain. So let's start. If you're sitting, just put your feet flat on the floor and your palms just comfortably either up or down on your legs. Lying down, we're going to do the full body scan to start. And let's start with sense in the back of your pelvis, and you identify what the back of your pelvis is. You might be higher than your pelvis is, you might be a little bit lower. It's okay. But sense the weight and pressure there on the floor, or if you're on a chair with a back, sense it against the back of the chair and sense the weight into your hips. And sense from left to right, take the spotlight of your attention from left side to right side of the pelvis. And notice that it probably feels slightly different on the left or the right side, from the left to the right. And you can even shift your weight left and right just a tiny bit, just to feel what's easier. Which way is easier? One way is probably going to be easier. Really small, really, really small. And then feel the connection of the ground with your head. Today's lesson is going to work on a relationship between the head and the pelvis. So take your attention to the quality of the weight of the head on the ground, and maybe even the neck, the back of your neck, the front of your neck. And then go down to the pelvis again and just notice, maybe you don't notice anything, but maybe there's some awareness that some angle or posture of your pelvis is being reflected in your head. Then also in your shoulders, the back of your shoulders. So if you can feel on the floor, it's going to be harder to feel this on the chair. Feel which shoulder blade is pressing more into the ground and which one is pressing less. And what is the quality of that weight? Now just take your attention down through your arms into your hands and notice left to right. Your hands are positioned differently. Your fingers are probably positioned differently. So your one wrist might be up higher than the other. These are all orientations that as we get to know them, we begin to become aware through a sort of a subconscious awareness. This becomes less, as you go through Feldenkrais, you have to work on it less. It just becomes a part of you. And now take your attention back into your pelvis again, and maybe your hips and your bottom laying on the floor. And notice which knee feels like it's higher off the floor. Feldenkrais, in his writing, the way he would describe this is, if a mouse were wanting to run under your knees, which one would it start with? He was constantly talking about mice running under you, creating space. And then notice that knee that has a little more space for a mouse to run under, there's a different quality of the weight on the floor in that leg all the way down to the feet. And again, as we did last week, notice when you notice your heels touching the floor, one heel is going to be turned a little bit more or slightly different. And you can feel that maybe if you're sitting, you can feel one heel might have a different pressure on the floor. Okay. So now I'm going to ask you to, in the simplest way possible, stand your feet, which means simply bend your knees and draw them up. But as we do, we're going to do this a number of times, and I want you to do it really simply and very, very easily. Put your feet flat on the floor and bend your knees. Now, feel your pelvis in this. People who are sitting will not be able to feel this because it's hard to straighten out your legs here. With your attention on your pelvis, lengthen your legs again, very slowly, and feel what happens in your pelvis. And then on your own now, draw them up again to standing, but put your attention in your pelvis. And again until you can say, oh, I sort of understand. Something's happening in my pelvis. Yeah, you could draw your feet out if you're sitting in back a little bit. I'm not sure it's going to change your pelvis. It might a little bit. Yeah. Draw your feet up on the floor. So I'm going to ask the people in the class here who are laying down, what do you notice happening in your pelvis when you draw your knees up? A reduction of pressure on the where? On the bottom of the pelvis or the top? On the bottom. So the pressure is moving in the pelvis from the bottom to the top of the pelvis. Oh, it's going this way too. What else do you notice? Yeah. So she's noticing a cradling motion. So if you could describe it, when your legs are down, the pressure goes down. And when your legs are up, the pressure moves up. Okay. So next time you stand your legs, just keep them standing. And let the feet be about hips width apart. And now, if we call your head toward your head, 12 o'clock on the pelvis, push your lower back into the floor, which is basically, just do it very slowly and do it again, slowly and again. So go from what we might say is 0 or the center of a clock face, if you put a clock on the back of your pelvis. That's it. Feel that if I push my lower back into the chair, I could feel the top of my pelvis pressing into the floor. Can you feel that? Let's call that 12 o'clock. And let's call neutral, which is not pushing anywhere, the center of the clock face. So get to know this shape from center of the clock face to 12 o'clock. Slowly, put a little rest in between each movement. And on your chair, you definitely can do this if you're sitting back. You can definitely feel that the pressure, it's harder to feel it because the pressure is not going down into the floor. Okay, now go to the center of the clock face, just neutral, and leave your legs where they are. And now, we're going to go to 6 o'clock. So that would be lowering the tailbone into the floor from the center, and just figure that out. I lower the tailbone into the floor. And the back arches a little bit. So just go from center to 6 o'clock now. Lowering the tailbone into the floor and arching the back. And right back to center. So is one side a little different than, like, is it easier to go 12 o'clock or 6 o'clock? It's not right or wrong, it's just something to notice. So now we have a 12 o'clock, a 6 o'clock, and a center of the clock. Go back to the center and just rest. And I'm going to lead you through some back and forth here. Very, very slowly. Center to 12 o'clock. Go to center. Go to 6 o'clock. Go back to center. 12 o'clock. And now go all the way through center to 6 o'clock, just in one motion. And now go back in one motion all the way to 12 o'clock. And do that a few times just on your own, 12 to 6 to 6 to 12 to 12 to 6. And lengthen your legs and rest. And notice if there's any changes in your pelvis, around your pelvis, around your shoulders. Stand your feet again. And very easily now, with your attention between your pelvis and your chin, notice what happens to your chin when you go to 12 o'clock. And then go back down to center, and then do it again. Really explore it to say, something's happening in my chin when I go to 12 o'clock. Could be your nose, too. I mean, your chin and your nose always stay in a relationship to each other. So, and then what happens when you go from 12 o'clock to, what happens to your chin when you go from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock? You can see it here. So feel, if you allow it, your chin goes in the same direction as I'm asking your pelvis to go. Can you feel that? Yeah? Can you feel that, Ron? So feel that 12 o'clock, and feel if your head moves at all, rolls back, or your chin. There it goes. Yeah, slight, right? Yep. Now, I will tell you that as you go, paying attention to this, one key to allowing that chin relationship is releasing through the whole torso. So this exercise, this lesson will help you to do that. So now, just in a blop, blop, blop fashion, just go 12 to 6 and feel that chin. It's almost like you're going to make a little jello here. It's like a little wavering back and forth. And just feel the freedom of the chin to move. And you might not feel what's holding it back, but basically your spine is pushing up through your skull. And if you allow it, it's rolling the chin as well. The head, while we're on the floor doing this, stays in constant relationship with the pelvis. When we go to 12, the chin goes to 12. When we go to 6, the chin goes to 6. That's it. And just do it a little faster even, but easy, easy, easy. Easy, easy, easy. Just faster. I don't know if this works when you're sitting very much. We'll see. Again, it's hard because this is pushing the spine along the floor. And go even a little faster, like a butterfly's wings. Maybe smaller, just faster. So you can just feel that wiggle in your chin and your pelvis. There you go, Ron. I can see it now, right? Yeah. All right, lengthen your legs. And check in now. Anything different? Is the pressure on the back of your pelvis any different? Anything through your torso different? stand your feet, bend your knees. Now this one you can do on the chair. It's fairly easy to do. So if you have 12 o'clock on the top of your pelvis and 6 o'clock on the bottom, find 3 o'clock. And I don't frankly care whether you get confused left or right, but do it, push your pelvis to 3 o'clock, but do it by moving one knee only, actually pushing into one leg only, and not moving both knees. So it would be easy to do it with what Virginia was just doing here, which is to tilt both. But I'm going to ask you to do it by pushing only into one foot. Okay? And do that a few times. You don't have to lift the pelvis to do this. You can just let it rest and move it to 3 o'clock. And now, if you're sitting here, moving to 3 o'clock, which side is 3 o'clock for you? Yep. So you feel yourself pushing into the heel of this side, or into the whole foot. You're going to push to the, yep, that's it. Now find 9 o'clock. From the center of the clock face, what do you do to find 9 o'clock? For me, one of these sides felt almost impossible, or like completely awkward, like I couldn't turn to one side. Is anybody experiencing that? Yeah. Now that is an interesting thing to notice because we're all pretty much biased in one direction or the other. Small, 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 slow. Very small. And moving only one knee. And now go back and forth between 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, just like we did between 12 and 6. Now, notice when you turn to 3 o'clock, does your chin follow? Can you allow your chin to just go to 3 with your pelvis and allow your chin to go to 9 with your pelvis? Take a rest. Lengthen your legs. So Feldenkrais is used a lot for looking at movement patterns of infants. And one of the things that infants need to do when they learn to crawl is getting the relationship between the pelvis and the head to operate. You've all learned it, otherwise you wouldn't be able to walk around or sit up. But you know where your head is sitting here, and you know where your pelvis is, and they're in relationship to each other. So you see a lot of Feldenkrais practitioners working with toddlers who are just not quite getting the pelvis-head relationship. In some ways, what I'm doing with you here in this lesson is returning you to a very basic movement pattern that you all learned as infants and then toddlers at different stages of development. And you learned it in all different ways. Some kids crawled more, some kids didn't. Okay, so now stand your feet. So let's do some 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock. It's very small, very, very small. Very slow, very small. Notice the chin again. Can the chin go 12 to 6? Can the chin just go along for the ride? As the spine moves, the chin moves. 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Okay. So now just rest in the center of the clock face. You've got that clock painted on the back of your pelvis. The shape of it is there now. Now, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to go to 12 o'clock, and then I'm going to ask you to go to 1 o'clock, slowly, and then 2 o'clock. Hold on. As you're doing this, notice that some of the numbers on the clock face are relatively unavailable for you. They're harder to sense. That's perfect. We're going to start doing circles with the pelvis, but we're going to do them very, very slowly. So clockwise, go to 12 o'clock and move slowly to 1 o'clock, and then back to 12. And then go slowly to 1 o'clock and then 2 o'clock. And you get it. I'm just going to repeat myself here. And back to 12. And then slowly from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Work your way in this fashion, one number at a time, all the way to 6 o'clock. And sometimes it may feel awkward or jagged. Like it might feel like you're stumbling, like you just don't know how to do this. And return through the clock face from 6. When you get to 6, return through the clock face to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wherever you are, you might have finished all the way to 6. You might be just at 4. Take a rest in the center of the clock. And I'm going to give you about a minute or 2 minutes to complete that clockwise circle all the way from 12 through 3 to 6 to 9, but going through every number back to 12. Go ahead on your own. It's clockwise circle of the pelvis. And if this gets frustrating, like you feel like you can't do it, let that frustration just be easy and light. Let it just be, it's very hard to do this perfectly because of the way we are organized and the way we use ourselves. But if you go slowly, your brain will pick it up, and your brain and body will figure it out. And you might begin to notice that your chin is also following and doing that circle, if you allow it. That's it. So it's pretty easy to see that sometimes people go to like 7 o'clock and they stumble a little bit and they go, I don't know how to do that. Once you've completed the clock face, just take it around in a circle a few times. Just explore with it. Clockwise only right now. That's it, and your chin can move too. Rest in the center of the clock face. And now we're going to go counterclockwise. And I'm going to give you a minute or two. We might go slightly faster through this, but go to 11, and then back to 12, and then go to 10 through 11, and then back up to 12. Don't miss a number. Moshe Feldenkrais was explicit about this. He kept saying it over and over again in this lesson. Do not miss a number. Because you could flatten off the side of the circle here, but you're not making the image in your brain of what is missing there. So even though it might feel frustrating or clumsy, awkward, keep searching for those numbers. And again, notice the chin. Take a rest with the knees where they are. Just rest in the center of the clock. And now, you choose, but do one clockwise, one counterclockwise, one clockwise. Just go back and forth on your own. I'm only going to leave 30 seconds or a minute for this. Just freely going clockwise to counterclockwise. And feel your chin. And lengthen your legs and take a rest. And notice if anything's different. Do you sense any different pressure on the floor? So those of you who were with us last week, we did a little exercise, a little lesson of rolling off to one side and coming to sitting. If you didn't do it, just come to sitting. But if you did it, remember last week, rolling off to one side and coming to sitting, just on the floor here. Yep. That's it. It's an easy way to sit up. And when you come to sitting, take the soles of your feet and put them together. And I don't care how close they are to your butt or to your body. Whatever's comfortable, there's no good or bad here. So figure out what's comfortable here. And now take your hands and put them behind you. So you're just propping yourself up sitting. Again, the position here is only for comfort. So soles of feet together. Like the bottoms of the soles touching. Yeah, that's it. Now, go toward 12 o'clock. Like roll, you're not going to be able to touch 12 o'clock on your pelvis, but roll back toward 12 o'clock. And then go to 6 o'clock, slowly, and back toward 12. You can even lean back in your hands if it's comfy. Yep, that's it. And back and forth between 12 and 6. And then on your own, find 3 and 9 o'clock and roll between 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. If you need to reposition, get comfortable for this and look at, Jenny's got her hands on the back. So if you're sitting, she's got her hands back on the side behind her. Okay, take a rest in the middle there, just with your sitting. If this gets hard for you, just take a rest. And now, we're going to go from 12 o'clock clockwise all the way around the clock. Feldenkrais's explanation or image for this is that you're rolling around the bowl of your pelvis. I think a bowl, you know, if you set a bowl and you spin, you sort of tipsy-turvy it, it goes, it like will touch all the areas of the pelvis. Feel like you have the edges of a bowl that you're moving around on the bottom of your pelvis. It's not really a bowl, but it can kind of feel like that, like your bottom is sort of a bowl. And you have to push your stomach forward to get there to 6 o'clock, right? And you have to push it back to get to 12 o'clock. So go all the way around the bowl, all the way around the clock. And you can be, Feldenkrais suggests that you can be a little bit forceful with this pushing of the belly forward. When you get around 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's it. Really push down and forward. And then experiment a few counterclockwise. Around the bowl, counterclockwise. And maybe a little faster now, but easy. Either way, clockwise, counterclockwise, just play with this bowl image. How do I roll around my pelvis here? Maybe you don't even complete the circles all the way through. Feel that when you want to come to 6 o'clock, you got to push your belly forward. That's it. Okay, take a rest on your back. You can have your knees up or you can have your knees down. However you'd like. And notice the difference in pressure. Or any difference in lying on your back. And now, stand your feet. 2 of here are already standing. And you're going to, it's a halfway sitting up. You're going to, this might be too hard to do. If it is, just sit with your hands behind you, but sit on your elbows behind you. So scoot your elbows back until you can sort of, yep, that's it. Now we're going to do the same thing. Find 12 and 6, and you see she's got her elbows on the back of the chair here. So 12, and then here you really have to push that belly forward. Yep, to get to 6 o'clock. And then 3 and 9. And go ahead with some circles here as well. And in the bottom of that bowl, feel, I really have to push my belly forward. I have to use myself. The back. and some counterclockwise and some clockwise. And when you are ready, do it a little more freely so it's like a little jelly or jello that just goes blop, 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 just wiggles around. That's it, just free. Okay, lie back on your back. Lengthen your legs now and feel the pressure. Feel maybe some things are settling a little bit through your back, through your pelvis, through your shoulders. And now I'm going to ask you to do a strange thing. And I kind of love this in the middle of this lesson. I'm going to ask you to lay just like this and figure out how to circle your pelvis. You can use your feet by pressing into the floor, like your heels. And you can use your hands to press into the floor too. But do it as easily as you can. Without stiffening your breath or your neck. Notice if you're really trying hard to make this happen, try less. Just notice that even lying flat, you can move your pelvis around in a clockwise circle. And again, Jenny, some of this you can't really, because you're not lying down. This is the part that you can't really do. But you could just continue practicing this pelvis circles, clock. Do some clockwise, some counterclockwise. Rest. Stand your feet. Come to sitting with your hands behind you. You remember this position. Take your right leg and cross it over your left leg. All the way over, like you're crossed, yep. And stand your left foot. That's it, yep. Now do circles. They're going to be like halfway circles, right? They're going to be weirdly interrupted. But let it be, like, let the goal of it, not to do a perfect circle, but to notice the places you can't do it. Maybe it's easier to go clockwise. Maybe it's easier to go counterclockwise. Stand both of your feet. Do a few circles here. It's a little easier, isn't it? You see that? Now take your left leg and throw it over your right leg and do some circles. I'm teaching you one of Feldenkrais's, definitely one of his most famous of his 2,500 or 3,000 lessons. This is called the pelvic clock. And there may be 100 lessons that are based on the pelvic clock. There's a clock that you can do in your middle. There's a clock you can do with your head. Stand your feet, both of them. Do some circles. All the way around the clock. Now go back to your elbows. And do the same thing. Throw your right leg over your left. Do some circles. If Julia's still here, I'm going to ask for questions in about 5 minutes. And counterclockwise. And then switch the legs. And do clockwise and counterclockwise. Circles. Very slow. Now stand both feet from here, do a few circles. I can even see here that this is easier. And lie back and extend your legs. And now, without doing anything else, stand your right foot and figure out how to do some circles by pressing into the floor with your foot. I don't care which way, clockwise, counterclockwise, you figure it out. Lengthen your leg. Do a few circles just lying here. Yeah. Stand your other leg. Do a few circles. Is she ready? Okay. Okay. I'll just leave some discussion at the end, just so you will let them know. So I'll leave a few minutes for discussion at the end or questions. Thanks, Julia. Lengthen your legs. Notice the pressure of yourself on the floor. Notice your breath. Now, take yourself back to about 40 minutes ago, and the very first thing I asked you to do was to stand your feet. Go ahead and do that. And remember, I asked you to find 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Is this any different now? And is your chin maybe more in an easier way following that movement? And do it a few times quickly, like jelly, like blah, 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 blah. Just so you can get that feeling of your spine being pushed right through your chin and drawing your chin down as well. And then go 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock here, and do it just to remember what it felt like to do it when you're first starting? And maybe your chin goes left and right along with your pelvis. And now do a few very simple clockwise circles. And remember when I first asked you to do that, and notice, is it any different? And do a counterclockwise circle or two, or a few, and notice if your chin follows or if there's anything different there. Lengthen your legs and rest. And now do a scan at the end of this lesson here and notice what feels different, if anything. So I'm going to ask those in the class here to say if anything feels different, like we did last week. Yeah.
When we started, my whole left side was higher.
She said her whole left side was higher when we started.
Now it's much more even.
Now it's more even.
Parallel.
Mm-hmm. Maybe the pressure in your shoulders any different? So now slowly roll off to one side, come to sitting, and come to standing. And walk around a little bit. And those at home, in about a minute, I'm going to ask if there's any questions, or sometimes I like to give you some information about the lesson.
We have one question about breathing.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So with your arms just out at your side, how do you feel walking around? And those in the class, you can talk about this if you have any awareness of things. You feel taller.
Feet flatter.
Uh-huh, feet flatter, sure. So there's a thing to notice here when you're walking, is that your hips are actually rolling. And it's a very complicated motion, but they're doing a kind of three-dimensional version of this. The hip does a thing what we call a high pointing. It goes up and down and up and down. What we just did with our pelvis really helps that walking to happen. We're not going to get to a big lesson we have one lesson on walking in the end, but it takes a while to get to that kind of awareness. And come back to your mats, and then, Julia, is the question about breathing, they just wanted me to comment on it?
Yeah, just insights on breathing.
Uh-huh.
They find themselves holding their breath.
Sure. You can stand, sit, whatever you like, lay down. So, think, why would you hold your breath? If you're holding your breath, why would you hold your breath? I mean, to hold your breath, go ahead and hold your breath. You're stopping. You feel? Holding our breath is a kind of effort. It's putting a brace there, because what we're doing in ourselves is saying, I need to brace against something to make more happen. This is just one direction we could go with this. In Feldenkrais, sometimes we ask for you to breathe out with the action. Mostly we ask you to breathe out with the action. But sometimes what Feldenkrais does, ultimately what he'd like you to do, is detach your breath from effort. And what he means is, if I were to, like from judo practice, if I were to go, like this, in toward you, normally that would be done on an exertion, like, right? But he will teach you, once you get into this, to completely let your breath go free. So sometimes I might, or sometimes I might breathe in and out. And what we're doing is detaching the habit of breath from effort. Ideally, he would like your breath to be easy and free and having its own journey, so that you can be prepared to do anything at any time. You're not what he would call obligated to one breath pattern. Now that is a neuroscience term, a neurologist term. Obligate movement is always in one direction. Always I do this. So if you can breathe easier, you can begin to allow the breath to have its own journey, free journey. Are there any other questions, Julia, from at home?
No, not at this time.
Okay, so this one is called the pelvic clock. And I might reference it later, but I'm not going to take you through any more in this 8-part series of pelvic clock exercises. Let me just say a couple of other things about it, though. When Jenny's sitting here, we often sit in positions that I would call obligate. We brace ourselves. Like often in the computer, we're sort of like, how do you sit at the computer? Yeah, so that's an obligate position, right? You're sort of bracing. You know, you're obligated to be in one space. Your pelvis, in sitting, is often the thing we need to shape to tilt it differently. In some somatic practices, that pelvic clock is simply called the pelvic tilt. So if you were to do this position where you're on the computer, and where's your pelvis usually when you're like, you're leaning forward a little bit? Right. So are you a little rounded here? So what if you were to take your pelvis and to roll it back toward 12 a little bit? Oh, look what happened to our shoulders. You see, people often say, I need to make my posture different. No, actually, allow your weight to settle freely on your pelvis, and you will change your shoulders. Do that again so we can show. So this is her leaned forward into 6, and then just tilt your pelvis back toward 12, wherever it's easy. And then notice, maybe it's freer. So one thing about the pelvic clock is, it doesn't just work on the pelvis. It works on the relationship between the head, the shoulders, the pelvis, through the pelvis. So you can use that when you're driving. Often people want to adjust their shoulders, and then they find that they're right back where they started, right, when they're driving. But if you're driving for hours and hours and hours, and you're like this, and you simply release your shoulders, but you don't release your pelvis, your shoulders really don't have many places to go. So if you release your pelvis, now my shoulders feel like they have places I could go. So the pelvis is really, really, really important in terms of orienting and organizing the rest of our movement. All right. See you next week, 10 o'clock next Tuesday. Bye.